Life is not easy and it is very hard to keep up on things, especially when you have ADHD. Not only do we love starting projects, it's very easy to get as far as the dopamine rush will take us. And then eventually the newness and that sort of fun part of it wears off, and we're left feeling like we wasted time. And then on top of that, just the regular daily grind of just getting through every day really wears on you after a while. It's so exhausting to just keep up the motivation to get through every day. This is even more difficult when it feels like life is just constantly dumping things on you. So, today we want to talk about three simple words, and they apply to so many things in life, which is don't give up. I'm Aaron,
I'm Cass.
and this is Fuck the Plan. So, Cass, there's a lot of ways that this applies, and I want to touch on a lot of them. Some are more aspirational and fun, and some are more difficult to talk about. So, I wanted to kind of put a warning out there up front that one of the topics I did want to talk about on this episode is suicide. So, I wanted to give a warning now, and I also want to say that if you're having a hard time, whether you're facing mental health struggles or emotional distress, alcohol or drug use, or just need someone to talk to, you are not alone. And I just want to encourage you to call or text 988, the suicide prevention hotline and crisis hotline. If you feel like nobody wants you here, you are wrong. We do. And I know this has touched your life a lot too, Cass. And I kind of want to keep that towards, the end of it here, get through some of the more lighthearted stuff, fun. But, there's a lot of important times when this don't give up applies. And really what comes down to me is like three big things. It's like one, the dreams and aspirations you have. Two, just the daily grind of getting through life with ADHD because it has just so much, it takes so much more effort just to get to like the baseline. And then three is just being here and not giving up on your own life through these struggles because, you can get through and get to the other side. And there is always hope for, a better day the next day. So first, I guess I wanted to get into something on the more lighthearted side of it is that we see a lot of opportunities and things, and we always want to start projects and hobbies. And a lot of times they end up not being things that we stick with, but sometimes it is. So tell me about that for you. Is that something that you have experience with too?
Um, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
So basically, like one of the things that happens to me and a lot of people with ADHD a lot is that we want to start lots of projects and then like the newness wears off and all of a sudden we're not interested in it anymore. And like I have a pile in my basement of hobbies that were started but never followed through on.
Yes, absolutely. Whether it's writing projects, I have like a fiction podcast that I started writing a couple years ago. I had a whole outline done, and you know me, I don't do outlines, so that's impressive in itself. And it's just it's supposed to be like 3 10-episode seasons. I've got like 7 episodes of the first season done, and I just haven't gone back.
And so like do you think like the newness wore off, or is it like you got as far as the hyper focus would take you and then when it came time to like follow through and do it on less dopamine, like the inspiration just wasn't there?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, I still really would love to go back to it. But I also have this thing in me that it's like I'm such a performer that when it's just for me, I have a hard time motivating myself. So I'm like, what? I'm just putting all this hard work in for it to just sit on a drive in my computer. That's fucking useless.
Right, right.
And it shouldn't be about that. Projects shouldn't be about presenting it should be, for your own edification, for your own improvement or enjoyment. But especially, and I'm sure like other performers that are listening to this understand, sometimes it's hard to take yourself out of that mindset. And then you get in your head about that as you're writing, and it just gives you one more thing to kind of pull you away from the actual activity.
Right.
I have a cross stitching kit that I got. Like, of course, this was in 2020 when
Yeah.
we're all sitting on our asses in front of the TV. And
That's
you'd
funny.
think that that would be a perfect thing to do because we're
Yeah.
always fidgeting. And it just, no, it's like you miss one stitch and the whole thing's ruined. And I don't have the patience to go back.
Yeah.
I just don't think that hobby was a good fit for me.
Didn't we talk about cross stitching with Russ when he was on the podcast? Didn't he say that he like all of a sudden got into to cross stitching during COVID and ended up
You
doing like
did?
these like portraits and stuff.
Yeah, it did not go that way for me.
No. It's funny how sometimes these things, like, come back to us later on, like, you find that thing that you started in the basement, and you're like, "Oh, wow, I have a little bit of, free time, I'm gonna go ahead and finish this now." And it's like, sometimes I wonder, like, what could have been if I did follow through on a lot of the things that I started, like, I've started so many different, like, little side projects or started music writing projects, things like that, or other
Yeah.
little hobbies, like repair projects on, like, little things around the house that just kind of, like, fall off. And like I think that that's a big part of having ADHD. I don't know if we're ever going to like avoid that entirely, but like sometimes I think like we kind of run out of that natural talent and skill and things start to be a little more challenging and our brains are like, "Oh, well this isn't giving me any fun dopamine anymore. This is costing me energy to like now try and learn the next step of this and
Yeah.
now I don't want anything to do with it anymore."
It's almost like it's almost like an eternal, New Year's resolution cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And man, I want to talk about that around New Year's is like the resolution cycle because that's always a
Oh,
funny
yeah.
one to talk
Gotta
about.
love the gyms in January.
Oh yeah, and it's funny. I actually experienced that for the first time because like I not this year, but the year before 2023, I did start going to the gym in like January, February, and it was crowded, and like we stuck with it for the whole year. And I just kept telling myself like, I just want to see next year if like I'm one of the people who made it through the year and like get to complain about the gym being crowded in January. And I actually made it, and
Look
like
at you.
this January. I was like, look at me now. Now I'm complaining about the new people when last year I was one of them.
That being said, if you make it and you're still going regularly by March, you've already done better than most.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. It's like March when it starts to actually drop off. And like it was
Mhm.
funny for me to notice that. And like I felt like, ooh, I'm one of the ones who made it, you know?
Toss, toss, I'm better than you.
Yeah, something like that. It's like that feeling of loss of like what could have been, you know what I mean? That like what's what am I getting at here? It's like, well, if you want to be good at something and if you want to stick with something, one of the things that I'm finding is that like it does take consistent practice and effort, and finding the time to do that is a lot more about not doing everything that comes up. You know what I mean? Rather
Yeah.
than indulging every little opportunity you have, like prioritizing the things that do actually matter, because we do need to practice consistently and do something on a regular basis in order to build that skill and actually ever be any good at it. But the problem is you can't do that and you can't have time to do that if you're always trying a million different things and always trying to make time for everything. It's more about reducing the amount of extra things that you're doing rather than focusing more on just the one thing. Because you'll find that if you stop doing 80 different things, all of a sudden you have time for the one that you were putting off.
Yep, and I think that is like, personally for me, I think that's a big that's a big thing
Yeah.
because I never have the free time
Yeah.
to keep going with these things, and that is just it's kind of my own fault, it's kind of the fault that, "Hey, I, need money so I don't starve to death."
Right. Yeah.
Um,
That's not a terrible thing to do.
yeah, there's a lot at play there, but the end result is the same where I don't have a lot of free time. So I try these new things and I get so far and then life takes over and all of a sudden it's kind of my fault, kind of not.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one of the things about ADHD, that it's like it's a double-edged sword because we do see a lot of opportunities in things, and like we do see sort of the possibilities. I think that's one of the things that is like in a way a positive thing about having this. Not that it's all positive or all negative one way or the other, but one of the things for better or for worse is that we always are seeing kind of the way I describe it sometimes is like the flow chart. Like we start with one thing. It's like, well, there's two options from here and then two more options from each of those. And like, we kind of see all those like endless Thanos style multiverse possibilities where Doctor Strange is like, I've seen 80 billion potential universe outcomes and stuff like that. So I think that's a good thing because it gives us the opportunity to see things that other people might not have. But then the flip side of that is we want to then go and do all of them. And we can't do every single thing that we try to. And if you want to have something reach that sort of possibility, you have to focus more time on it. And I guess the point that I'm getting at is like prioritizing what really does matter and what's important for you to do is the path to actually accomplishing some of those things. It's not about like trying everything, even though I do think we should try a lot of things. Sometimes it's about once you try a few things and find something really like doubling down and focusing on just that. We know the hyper focus can help out with that sort of thing, but it's about choosing what we use that for, which is not something that I always like stopped to think about.
Yeah. And what's tough about that is that prioritizing little things is hard for us.
Yes.
Never mind big projects or trying to figure that. Like, I have trouble prioritizing, should I make coffee first or should I go to the bathroom?
Dude, I
Those are
totally
things that
understand.
you like, your body's telling you one
Yes.
thing and you're like, but if I'm gonna make this trip worthwhile, I might as well have coffee first.
Oh my god, dude, it's like that. There's that meme going around. It's like only ADHD would make you procrastinate having to go to the bathroom. It's like, really, I literally this morning I was standing downstairs and I was like, I'm not kidding. I was going to empty out the grinds from the cold brew maker and finish making coffee, and I was like, do I go to the bathroom first or do I finish this and then go to the bathroom? Because then I'll have my cup of coffee, and then if you know what I mean, that'll make going to the bathroom a bit of
Yup.
a quicker process.
Okay, it honestly it makes me feel a little better that I'm not the only one who does
No, that
this.
literally happened to me this morning. I'm putting myself on blast out here on the internet, as far as my bathroom rituals go in the morning. But that first cup of coffee really gets everything moving. Like
Yes.
it's sometimes it's more of a process if you don't have that first. So I gotta try and have my cup of coffee first. But the other like drawback to that is I don't like to drink a cup of coffee until I've been awake for like an hour because of like cortisol levels and things like that. I don't have you heard about like how coffee affects cortisol and all those things?
Yes, and you're actually the one who taught me about that.
Oh, right, right.
I don't like drinking caffeine until I have something in my stomach because then I'm gonna feel nauseous.
Yeah. No,
So
I'm
that
with
adds a
you.
whole new layer to it. Because then
Yeah.
sometimes I'm like, oh, I forgot to have caffeine. That's why I feel this way.
Yeah. I have, like,
And
such a routine on the weekday mornings at least that it's not usually an issue, but it's like I I used to be like the wake up and immediately go and get a cup of coffee to, like, wake up kinda thing, like, that was my first priority in the mornings, but since I started pushing it to, like, an hour, now, like, I have the freedom on the weekends, like, if we wanna go somewhere and get coffee, I wake up earlier than Marissa, so I'm not like getting that caffeine headache for the first hour that I'm awake. I like my body is used to like waiting a little bit now. So even if it's like an hour and a half, 2 hours before we're actually like up and dressed and out to wherever we're getting coffee, like now I can actually enjoy that instead of having to like have a pre cup of coffee before we go out for coffee kind of thing.
yeah. And all of that is a very long way of saying prioritizing is hard.
It is. And it's like, so, all right. So the idea of this episode is don't give up. So you might be wondering, all right, how are we going to tie this? Because we're talking about starting things and all these different priorities and things like that. So to bring it all back together here, what I'm trying to get across is that in order to keep going with something, like say you want to start a podcast, say you are a musician, say you want to just change your career into something that's better for you, and that requires starting a business or getting a camera and practicing photography and things like that. It's very easy to get started with those things, but it's very difficult to keep going with it, especially when we have a million different things pulling our attention in all these different directions and wanting you to begging you to say, hey, come and try cross stitching. Photography was fun for 20 minutes, but think about how fun it is to poke yourself in the fingers with a needle 80 times. Like you have all these things pulling away from you. And what we really need to understand is that it does take consistent practice over a significant period of time to get good at these things. And we have to constantly remind ourselves of what is important and give ourselves a reason for those things to be important to give us the need to stick with it, if that makes sense. So like one of the things I learned in the book Atomic Habits is that the most important factor for whether or not you actually stick with something is not like whether you're good at it or whether you like it or whether you like really made a good New Year's resolution commitment for it, but it's whether you identify with it. So like if you have trouble getting up in the mornings and you say like, "Oh, I just can't wake up in the morning," you're perpetuating that subconsciously. But if you start telling yourself like, "I need to become a morning person. I'm going to be a morning person." Then you start thinking of like, "Well, what does a morning person do?" Well, they get up early and they kind of like it. And reinforcing that self with that thought pattern in your mind of like, I identify with being a morning person rather than just like, I'm not a morning person, but I'm going to force myself to do it, is like a much smoother and easier path to getting where you want to be. And whether it's being a writer, being a musician, being just in a different field, who maybe you want to be a carpenter, maybe it's some other kind of trade or some job that it's just like different than what you're doing now. You need to work at it. And in order to do that, you need to prioritize focusing on what's important. Why? Because I want to have the freedom that this gives me. So instead of focusing on, I want to start a business because I want to make lots of money, or I want to start a business because, I want to be my own boss, if you compare the two, being your own boss is a lot more important than money because you can make money at a lot of different types of jobs. So you have to identify with the feeling of what you're trying to get to and what that is going to do for you in order to give yourself the actual reason that you need to stick with it, because otherwise it's just not it's incongruent in your brain. You're trying to do something that you don't identify with, and if you don't identify with it, then of course you're not going to stick with it. And the way that you learn to identify it is to do it. And the more you do it, the more it is like a feedback loop to reinforce that in your brain. And it gives you each day a little bit more evidence that you're capable of it. And if you just continue to tell yourself, I can't give up on becoming XYZ type of person that I want to be, or having XYZ type of life, then it's a lot easier not to give up on that because you already identify with, I want to be this way or feel this way, rather than I just want to have these material things, which is really kind of fugazi. It doesn't do anything for you, if that makes sense. Am I making sense here, Cass?
Yes. Um, I wanted to circle back. You mentioned money. And yes, making money. But I don't know if you've done this too. And I haven't really done this since I got out of investments because now I literally can't. But back then when I had a decent amount was making a decent amount of money, I would kind of use the financial investment of a new hobby as, well, I'm going to stick with it. I spent this money.
Oh, right.
You know, whether it's I never tried to get into photography, but
Yeah.
cameras are expensive. Like, you buy yourself a camera, you buy yourself fancy recording equipment, you buy yourself this, script writing software or whatever, and you're like, well, I've sunk this much money into it. I'm gonna stick with it because I don't want to waste that money. You
But
won't.
the
It's
problem,
not a good enough motivator. Even if you are strapped,
yeah,
you're not gonna use that to keep going with your hobby. It's just gonna cause you more stress. And then
this
it's almost gonna make you resent what you're trying to
oh my
do.
god, dude, you're like, I've been through this so many times with the financial, and what I've realized is just that like I you can always make more money. So it doesn't matter to me. Like my perspective on money is that like money is there to be used for what you need it for. You know what I mean? So I will subconsciously rationalize myself out of like, all right, well, who cares that I spent money? Because guess what? I can always make more money. I have a job, I have a business, I can make more money. And that financial investment, all right, so that's gone. But whatever. Like it just doesn't hit me that hard for some reason. I don't know. Maybe that's bad. Please don't get the idea that I'm just like, wealthy and blowing a bunch of like, inheritance money, because that's really not the situation. Like I support myself 100%. I'm doing fine, but I'm not sitting on, as I mentioned before, I do not have a Scrooge McDuck sized pile of gold coins to go swimming in. But at the same time, like money is something that comes and goes. And I've just had a lot easier time in my life managing the stress of managing money by telling myself like, all right, well, money comes and money goes. You can always make more and you can always lose it. So be careful with what you have, and if you spend it and it doesn't end up working out, then all right, you lost it. Don't I try not to beat myself up too much over it, because I have done that kind of thing that you described a lot of times in my life. And so I have to choose between like, do I manage the stress and of dealing with the fact that I spent money and try and help my mental health, or do I try and force myself to do something that I really don't care about because I've spent money on it? And it's the point that you said is that it's just not going to work because it's not a strong enough motivator. The better thing to do is prevention, right? Like this is a universal thing. Like rather than fixing the problem or forcing yourself to stick with a mistake that you made just because you spent money on it, prevent the problem from happening. Stop yourself before it gets to that point.
I think a really good example of this, a few years back, I was dating somebody who was really into like outdoor rock climbing.
Yeah.
And
That's a
given
a really I don't what am I trying to say? That type of hobby is like you have to be an outdoor rock climbing person. Like there's no people who are just like casual outdoor rock climbers, right?
right, and I wanted to give it a try, but that's not something that you're like, "Oh, I'll just go out and learn it on my own." No, because that's how you die, like,
You mean
horrifically.
you're telling me I can't watch a 25-minute YouTube video and learn everything I need to know about outdoor rock climbing? Because
I don't think so.
I've done that with almost everything else in my life. So I'm pretty confident that I can learn how to rock climb in like, I don't know, 20 to 40 minutes with YouTube.
Let's see how far that gets you. But, I couldn't even tell you for sure because I didn't even do that. So, I wanted to try it because 'cause I'm like, "This seems like something I would really like, and once I get the hang of it, it seems like something I'd probably be good at." And so, like, right on the fly, I was like, "Alright, I'm gonna do this. What kind of stuff do I need? And then you can teach me because God knows I can't just, like, go out and do it myself." Which that was smart because if I tried to go out and do it myself, I probably would be horrifically injured.
I would imagine.
Yeah. And so I was told what kind of stuff I needed. I went and I dropped like $200 without even thinking on, like a harness and chalk and all kind of stuff like that. And I have never used it in 3
Nice.
years. One, that ex never actually took the initiative to, like, go out and help me, which sucks. But if it was
Well, yeah.
something that I was genuinely passionate about learning, I wouldn't have needed them. I would have been like, "All right, well, this person's not gonna help me. I can go to a local rock climbing gym and see about that. I can look up instructors. I can find
Right.
other resources." But it was almost like I used that dead end to justify, "Oh, well, whatever. I guess that's it."
Yeah. And it's like, not giving up on things is not even so much about like just powering through. It's about choosing what you want to focus on. And if you really did have a passion for rock climbing, then like you said, you could have just stuck with it easier. It's not always that simple to just stick with it, but like it's easier to tell yourself, I really want to be an outdoor rock climber. Let's not give up on this.
Yep.
And like, how do you know what matters and what's important and make it stick? So, kind of the key to this and the thing that I think really affects whether or not you're actually going to stick with something is we need to fall in love with kind of the process of these things and not like the results that it's going to bring. So if you are trying to start a business, for example, and you're going to start a business that you don't like if you hate bugs and pests and rodents, don't start an exterminator business, like
Or do.
or do. But, like, if you can't be around them, you know what I mean? Like, if you
Yes.
can't physically do or don't like to do the process of something, you're doomed from the beginning, and you're not going to be able to really fall in love with the process of it, because it's the process that's the most important part, right? So, I like the process of doing this podcast and all of the things that we do is that the daily ins and outs of actually doing this, like the logistical things, are things that I enjoy doing. So it's not necessarily that like I want the results of people liking our podcast, even though I do really like when when people like it. But it's that I enjoy, and I'm sure you do, we enjoy having these conversations and talks and diving into these topics and helping people. And it's the process that we really like. It's not necessarily the results. Cass and I have played music for many years because we like playing music. It's not because we we're in love with the idea of becoming famous musicians. It's that the daily ins and outs of playing music and expressing ourselves and getting those thoughts and emotions out. And when we have a chance going to perform and making people feel some type of a way with our music, that's the part of it that we enjoy. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You're right, and it does circle back to what I was saying when it's like I have trouble nowadays pulling myself out of the performer bit and making myself, like, enjoy the process of writing and not thinking, okay, once all this work is put in, what am I going to do with this?
Right.
Am I going to send it here? Am I going to produce it here? Am I going to be able to cast this? Am I going to be, and it's like, it makes writing not enjoyable. It makes it stressful and it makes it something I don't want to do.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of reasons why my mindset has gotten to that point. With ADHD, a lot of us are these like perfectionist overachievers that are like, well, if it can't be perfect, it shouldn't exist at all.
Right.
And I'm definitely at that point. And I have done so, I had my last one produced and I am trying really hard to constantly up my game. And it's not a matter of, okay, I am excited to put this out there when it's done. It's, is this going to be as good or better than the last thing I did? If not, it's not worth it.
Right.
And that is a mindset I think that a lot of us do have about various things, not all about the arts, but like various things in our life that make us kind of sabotage ourselves.
Right.
And it's hard to get over. And I wish I had better advice, but it's something I'm struggling with too.
Yeah, I mean, I totally know what you mean. Like, I hit a point this year with things with the ADHD project and the business to where like a lot of the day to day things shifted from things that I enjoyed doing and things that I thought were doing good and helping people to basically just chasing logistics things and kind of focusing on the things that were not the parts of it that I liked. And I kind of want to make a point that you don't necessarily need to stick with every single thing or channel or path. It's just that you can not give up on the overarching goal and the overarching process that you're working on. So, what I want to do is help other people with ADHD lead a life that they like. I want to help other people actually enjoy the lives that they're living. And if what I'm doing becomes not about that, then I need to move on from that part. So
Right.
I want to be clear that I'm not just saying like if you start a hobby, you have to stick with it forever. What I'm saying is that if you understand what's important to you and you want to make your life about that, then you don't necessarily have to stick with every single thing that you try, but you can stick with that overarching value that you're trying to deliver. You can stick with the overarching feelings in life that you want to experience. I want to create good experiences for people. That's one of my major life goals. And whatever that means, whether that's through a podcast, through cooking for people, through playing music, you don't have to do the same exact thing over and over again to achieve the same values or goals that you're trying to project out there. And what I'm getting at is that like my goal in life and what I'm suggesting that we set as goals in life are things that we do, things that we become, processes that we can live on a consistent open-ended basis. If I talked about this many times through all different sorts of channels, but like if you are working out to get a six-pack abs and you hit that, then what's your motivation to keep going from there? Nothing, right? Other than maybe maintain. But if you have a goal of I want to get healthy and I want to be able to you know live as long as I can for my family, that's open ended and that's something that you can stick with forever. So don't give up on that open ended, value driven sort of long term goal that you have. It's okay to give up on little things here or there if they're not supporting that goal. But this is what I mean by focusing on what matters and priorities is that my priority is not my priority is not a single closed-ended task that I can check off of a checklist. My priority is an open-ended lifelong goal of creating good experiences for people, helping other people with ADHD, being the best husband and eventually father one day that I can be, and like all of these things that support the life that I want to live, not the individual tasks that I want to do. So the process of finding what all of that means for me is what I try and focus on not giving up on. I don't care if I have to give up on one part of it if that's not supporting my overall goal. Does that make sense?
It does. And there are two things that, came to my mind while you were saying that. One, yes, it's good to focus on a big overarching, somewhat open-ended goal. But in my head, sometimes when I have just that, it almost sounds more theoretical than an actual thing. And so that might be the end goal, but it helps to have
Pause.
little. Did you stop recording for a second?
No, it was just my my camera screen like last time. So if you want to start back with like just where you were talking about just the end goal.
Yes. So when you have just an end goal, sometimes it almost feels more theoretical than like an actual tangible thing you can reach.
That's true.
And so it helps for me to have smaller, hey, here is how I can actually visualize I did that. I hit that goal along the way.
Oh yeah.
Kind of like in a video game when you're on one mission and then you have a bunch of like side quests to help get you there.
Yes.
It it makes you feel like, okay, this is a very broad thing that I've set out to do, but I've hit these milestones, which means I'm on the right track.
That's
And
totally right. I totally agree with that. And what I'm trying to say is that like one of the things that's so hard for me is like every day I sit down, I'm like, what the fuck am I going to do today? Right. Like everybody with ADHD has that moment in the mornings or whenever you start your day is like, all right, well, what am I doing? And we get kind of lost at certain points where we feel like we drift away, and having something that's overarching gives me kind of a guide to get back to say like, all right, what little milestones do I need to be doing,
yeah.
if I'm not keeping the main thing in my brain, then I don't know what to do for the small day-to-day ones. So I totally agree with your point. But I think what I've struggled with is on a small scale, on a day to day or week to week basis, trying to figure out what I'm doing to support that, and trying to
Yes.
get those little things together.
And the other thing I wanted to circle back on when I said two things, um, when you were saying we're not saying not to give up on certain things. Honestly, there are things that you should quit.
Yes.
Um, Part of trying new things, which is something that people should constantly be doing, because the second you stop trying new things, you're pretty much dead inside, and who, that's no way to live. But sometimes you try new things and you realize you just don't like it, and it's not for you, and you shouldn't beat yourself up over the fact that you're not constantly trying to do these things. I know for a fact that I will never be a drummer. I I am too white. I do not have the rhythm for such an endeavor. And I know that. I'm very aware of that. I've tried it a couple of times, and because I've always been like, "Oh man, it would be awesome if I could play the drums." I feel like it's a good anger management. You get that all
Right.
out. It'd be awesome. I've tried it and I feel completely lost, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"What is this?" And I just don't enjoy it the way I thought I would. I'm not gonna sit there and kick my ass because I'm not Dave Grohl all of a sudden. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and kick my ass because I don't like it, and I'm not gonna
Right.
try and hold myself at gunpoint and force myself to like something. That's putting the energy that you could be using somewhere else into the wrong spot. I
Right.
tried it. I don't like it. I like acoustic guitar. I like singing. I like writing songs and lyrics. That's where I thrive. Drumming's not for me, and that's okay. Moving on.
Right.
And,
And I think you're
luckily
kind
I
of
didn't. Oh, keep going.
I think you're kind of making the point there too, is that like you didn't like drumming, but you still like music and you are a
Yes.
musician. So it's okay, I think, to move on from those small things, like you said, because in order to reach the overall, I want to be a musician, you have to find a way that that works for you. Right.
Mhm.
And you will have to try little things. So it's not that you have to stick with every little thing that you pick up, is that you have to have some idea of like, if I want to be a musician, I need to stick with it, and what does that mean for me, like for you it's acoustic guitar and singing and musicals and things like that. For somebody else it's different. So but if you gave up on music because you didn't like drumming, you never would have known what could have been. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes, that is a wonderful point. And there are so many people that think, especially in the artistic realm, of the well, when you think of music, you think of the lead singer, lead guitarist on stage getting attention.
Right.
Theater the same way. You think of these leading roles, but sometimes you can have an interest in something very creative, or on the flip side, something very, administrative and logical. And the thing that you actually love about that is not what you first think of.
Oh yeah.
Maybe you love theater, but you don't like being on stage. You might be an incredible stage manager. You might be an incredible like box office manager.
That's exactly right.
Maybe you have like maybe you are interested in finance,
Yeah.
but
There's
you're not good at the advisory thing, and maybe you're a great creative marketing team for an institution.
right. And it's funny that you mentioned that because in my day job career, I don't think I was terrible at being an actual financial advisor, but it wasn't what I liked most about it. And I shifted back to a more operational, like helping other people kind of role within that industry for my day job. And that worked out for me. And it made it so I can tolerate being in this career and this I what this industry, I lost the word for a second, for long enough to where I might be able to build, myself a business on the side and then eventually move on from that. But the point is, I wouldn't have been able to do that had I stuck with like, I need to be a financial advisor and forced myself into that part of it. And I think
Mhm.
that it's like so difficult sometimes to make those decisions because you think, all right, I'm not going to give up. But in some cases, you have to give up so you cannot give up. Like if you didn't give up on drumming, you might not have found how much you liked playing acoustic guitar or singing. And it sucks sometimes when you have to make those decisions. Like I know that I'm not the only one who's just been incredibly stressed out about something like that. And you get stuck in that feeling of like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing with my life. Like, I am sure you felt that before, right?
Yes, and I think that, you know, the root of all misery, I think, is expectation.
I
Whether
could
it's
certainly agree with that.
Yeah, whether it's an expectation for yourself solely or the expectation to be where somebody else is, we have these set sort of this is the way I should be, this is the way it should be. And when we don't match that, everything falls apart for us. But it's okay to not match that because you're
Right.
learning about yourself. I've said 1,000 times on this podcast and the things I've written that the whole point of life is learning about yourself and
Yes,
growing from that.
I agree.
And if you meet all of your expectations, you are not learning anything about yourself. You're simply just following a to-do list, more or less.
And it's
And
funny that
that's
you mentioned that because I wrote down a note that you need to understand that the end goal is less important than the process that gets you there. So you don't have to be good at it. You have to be in love with getting better at it. And I think expectations, when you have too high of an expectation, you're in love with reaching a goal or being good at something or being where you want to be. But in actuality, the only way to get there is to forget about it a little bit and fall in love with getting better. You don't need to
Mhm.
be good. You need to get better because you can consistently get better. You can't always be good at something, but you can always work towards it, right?
So Matt and I are absolutely obsessed with that show, Only Murders in the Building.
Right.
And there was a line in like a couple episodes ago where a writer says, at the end of the day, I realized the only way to get better at my craft and to get rid of this imposter syndrome was to actually sit down and work on the thing I was feeling like a phony at.
Right.
And, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something that I think we've all felt. I think artists definitely feel it
Yes.
hardcore,
Yeah.
but to an extent, everybody does. And especially people with ADHD who tend to be those types of type A perfectionist. Everything I do has to match my, gifted child past.
Yeah. No, I'm totally with you on that. And it's like, you and I are obviously more of the creative type. So we talk about that side of things more often. But, I mentioned, a few minutes ago, like, what if you really want to be the best carpenter or woodworker that you can be, or
Mhm.
you're a mechanic, or, maybe you're a teacher and you really want to learn how to teach better, or how do I reach these kids? Like South Park, like you're trying to be better at what you're doing. And it's really frustrating and discouraging and disheartening at times to feel like you've invested so much of your life into something and it's not paying off for you and you're
Mhm.
in this stressed out spot. You're feeling like this is not what I expected, what I signed up for, what I wanted. And those feelings can really hurt and they can really affect us in a big way. And one of the ways I kind of wanted to tie this in because I know I mentioned we're going to talk about the topic of suicide is
Mhm.
like I have certainly gotten to a point in my life where I feel like I am so lost in the sauce with this that I really thought that I wanted and really felt like was the right thing for me, and it seems to be blowing up. And what is my life going to be worth anymore? Like maybe I should just give up in general because the reality is the day-to-day life management part of ADHD is absolutely fucking exhausting because
It
everything
is.
takes constant effort over and over again. You mean I got to do this shit every fucking day over and over again? Use all of this effort, this mental energy that we don't have to do shit that we don't care about, to make people that we don't give a shit about happy with our work performance or some dumb shit, whatever the hell it is you're dealing with in your life. It gets so incredibly just like miserable and difficult to get up and even just like function when you're having to do this constant daily grind every day. And
And a lot of
yeah,
oh, sorry. A lot of it, again, comes from that expectation. And a lot of it isn't just because you're trying to meet somebody else's deadline or like I'm trying to be the best for my boss or this.
oh,
It's coming from
it's for me.
inside.
It's definitely for
Yeah.
me. I let myself down more than I let anyone else down because I have such high
Mhm.
expectations for myself.
Exactly. And in that, I think we often lose sight of the fact that getting there is a goal. Maintaining it and improving upon the goal you've already reached is also a big deal.
Yeah.
When Matt was first getting into modeling, I think he was out in LA and he was told the most LA thing possible, which is anytime you're not at the gym, your competition is, which is incredibly superficial
Yes.
and very LA. But if you peel back the superficiality of the strictly gym looks component of
Right.
that, it's true. You might be the best at what you do, but if you're content to be like, "Well, I'm the best. Okay, that's it." No, no. Somebody younger is going to come along, somebody new to the activity is going to come along and will want it just as bad as you did at one point and will pass you. You will not remain the best. Somebody is going to be better than you if you just sit back and you're content and trying to motivate yourself to constantly not only remain, at the level you're at, but to constantly keep learning new things, learning new methods. Say that you are really into coding and programming. Technology is always changing.
Right.
If you kick back and say, "Well, I've learned to be the best and that's it," technology is moving so fast. In 2 years, your knowledge is going to be out of date.
Absolutely.
You have to keep up on things.
And that's really, one of the things that I wanted to mention is that the people who succeed and who last are the people who stick it out. And if you continue that process and if you really love the process of doing what you're doing and you can just stick with it, you're nearly guaranteed to succeed because just like you said, people come and go in this thing every single day. There's a new person in there trying to work harder than you. And if they only make it 3 weeks and you're now at week 4, week 5, week 6, the longer you continue to go with something like that, the more chance you have of eventually having success because it's really not the ones who are the best who make it. It's the ones who are the most consistent. And consistent doesn't mean showing up perfect every day, it means not giving up.
Yeah.
I certainly feel like the only way that you fail is if you stop trying because you can always continue trying. You hear stories all the time of people who have failures for 30, 40, 50, 60 years of their lives, but they didn't give up. And then in year 65, all of a sudden they have all the success that they wanted. And I'm not just talking financial success. I'm talking about getting to a point where you're happy with your life and what you're doing.
Mhm.
And I think that that's something that has to come from within and it has to come from loving the process. And you can't love the process if you're working towards something that's inauthentic. That's not really what you want to be doing. And I think a lot
Exactly.
of times we find ourselves in those situations where we're putting in more effort than we want to for things that don't matter. And that's when things get really disheartening and discouraging too. And like, not to turn the podcast towards things that are a little darker, but like when you find yourself in that situation where you feel like you're spinning your wheels and constantly working for nothing and there's no way out of this situation, that's when you start having those dark feelings and those thoughts of like, well, maybe I should just give up on life in general. And I want to acknowledge this struggle that we have to where it's very depressing to get to the point of feeling like, well, I feel like I have what I wanted, my goal, but I'm not happy. I don't like the work that I'm doing. I don't like the actual ins and outs day to day of this goal that I wanted for so long, and it's very easy to say, well, I guess I just have to give up. But if you give up on yourself, you rob yourself of those opportunities to find what you really do like about it. Like you said, if you give up on drumming, you rob your if you give up on music because you gave up on drumming, you rob yourself of the opportunity to find what you are good at and what you do enjoy doing. And I know that you and I have both had experiences with suicide in our lives in many ways, and I know that there's probably people out there who are feeling like maybe it's just time to give up on life. And what I'm trying to get across here is that because you have these struggles with what you're working on doesn't mean you need to give up on yourself. Maybe you just need to give up on a rough situation, or at some point, you need to make a change in your life. But giving up on yourself robs you of the opportunity to see what you could actually accomplish when you adjust and focus on the right things in life.
I do want to say too, and obviously I have a unique perspective on this specific matter, but wanting to remove yourself from the world doesn't necessarily mean that you are giving up on yourself. There's an element of it where sometimes it's not necessarily that you don't think you're worth working on. It's that you're like, well, this is the way the world is, and the world is not built for people like me. And I have tried my best, but I am never going to fit into this world. I am never going to be able to succeed the way things are set up, the way people think. I just do not fit. And it's not necessarily, I'm going to stop improving myself. It's no matter how much I improve myself, I am still not going to fit into this world. So why keep spending the effort? So it's almost like, yes, it's coming internally, but it's also thinking about the external world and how you fit.
Right.
You might think that you are the best thing that's ever lived, but if you don't think that the world around you can jive with that, it doesn't matter. And
Understood.
it can, a lot of times it flows in and out. Sometimes you're the problem, sometimes the world's the problem. It, your manner of thinking can swap, and everybody's different. But I know when I was at the height of this, it was yes, everyone keeps telling me I'm young, I have so much to live for, whatever. But if this is the way the world is, I don't want to live for it. Like,
Yeah.
fuck all of this.
I
And
I totally
that's,
get that for sure. And like when I have had issues with this sort of thing, it's also been the feeling of like, well, I'm never going to be able to do XYZ. Like this is never going to work for me. So what's the point? And
mhm,
I've had two immediate family members, my father and one of my aunts, who have both passed from suicide, and as well as a good friend of mine, that it was one of the first friends I made when I moved here to Rhode Island. And one of the things that from what I gather, was in common between them, was that feeling of like there's no way out of this, and no matter what I do, like it's not worth it for me to be here. People would be better off without me being here, and
mhm,
based on what we've gathered at this point. And what I oftentimes think about is that like even though that situation was rough and you felt that way, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's true outside of your brain. You know what I mean? There's always ways that we can I can what am I trying to say here? I guess uh, there's reasons that you feel internally things are not worth it for you, and I totally understand that feeling. But a lot of times it comes from a short-sighted perspective of a problem that's in front of you, and I
yes.
often think back to what one of our guests, what was his name, Sean, mentioned is that like when he was dealing with people working at the crisis hotline, is he would ask them the question of like, well, if this problem were to go away, would you still think life was worth living? Or not, and that one really hit home to me because like a lot of times we get caught up in the minutia of our problems, and it's hard to see the anything beyond that. You know what I mean? And you feel like, well, the world is always going to be this way. And that might be a bit of a fallacy. That might be a thing where it's like, well, is it, or is that how you're feeling because of this problem? And look, by
Mhm,
no means am I a therapist or a counselor or anything like that. But what I do want to say is that giving up on the idea of anything ever possibly being better is a hard thing to kind of overcome and get past. And I just want to encourage anyone that if you are feeling that way, you're not alone. Other people have felt that way too. And that doesn't have to be the answer. It's, the name of your play, permanent solutions, right? It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem, is what people say to you. But think, and this thought has saved me at times in my life, is, well, if this problem were gone, if I could solve this and figure out a way to get through this problem, is life still worth living? And do I still want to be here? And, for me, a lot of times the answer is yes.
Yeah, and along that, the problems don't feel temporary when you're in the midst of them.
No,
But, and I'm semi joking when I say this, everything's temporary.
that's fair.
Um, and sometimes, you're sitting there thinking there is no point to life. There's no meaning to life. And I'll say, like, personally, I'm an atheist. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's nothing out there. I don't judge anybody who decides, who doesn't, prescribe to that. But personally, I have never been able to believe. And part of me wishes I could, because I think that it would be easier to deal with life if I thought that there was some grander purpose out there. And so I can totally understand why it's so important to people. But because I've never been able to make it make sense, even from a young age, when I was a teenager, it was just life is meaningless and we're alone in the world, whatever. Now I'm like, life is meaningless.
This is
We're
great. I
alone
can
in
do
the
whatever I
world.
want.
Exactly.
I
It's,
totally
it's
get that.
you change your you can change your perspective even if the quote unquote negative thought doesn't change. Even if you can't make yourself believe in something that doesn't quite click with you, the way you think about it can change, because yes, I still believe that there is no meaning out there for us. But that means that I get to create my own meaning and figure out what life means to me personally, and not just a big umbrella statement of this is what life should be meaning to humans. This is how humans should be living their life. No, I get to figure out personally how to make that happen for me. And I actually find that incredibly empowering. Whereas, 12 years ago, I thought it made all this effort just not worth it.
Right.
And that is, a 12-year process. I've had suicide attempts in between then and now. And these are lessons that I didn't just wake up and figure out myself. These are lessons that years of therapy and medication, and going off of medication when I shouldn't have, and then going back on it, and then writing plays and self harm, and like a whole bunch of a whirlwind, a shitstorm
Right.
led to this point. And in terms of meeting goals and having broad goals and stuff, I'm not I'm never going to be 100% better. It's part of my diagnosis. I'm referring more to the bipolar disorder than the ADHD.
Right.
You know, bipolar 1. Sometimes I have manic episodes that last months at a time. Sometimes they're a week. Sometimes I'll go a couple years without mania at all. But I'm doing what I can for the problem. I care enough about reaching some level of stability that I'm still trying. I haven't given up on therapy, on medication, on trying to manage this. But just because I'm never going to be better, just because there's no cure for bipolar disorder, doesn't mean I can't continually get better at managing it.
Right. It's like
Medication, it's
it's
not
like I'm
going to
always
stop
saying
it.
that the effort is what yields the rewards. It's not reaching
Yep.
the goal, it's the effort that you put in. And in a lot of ways, it's about outlasting, right? It's like Survivor, outwit, outplay, outlast, right? It's not the ones who are the best who succeed. It's the ones who stick it out and who outlast the problem. Because a lot of things, like you said, are temporary. Problems come and go, just like successes come and go.
Mhm.
And success to me is not so much about reaching a specific thing, it's still going on anyways. And what is in a world that is meaningless and wants to beat you down and wants you to fail to fulfill your dreams, what is more badass than still trying anyways and just rebelling against that thought of like, well, things must always end terribly. It's more the thought of like, I'm going to keep going anyways, even when things end terribly, because that's
Mhm.
punk rock, right? That's what I think is the most important thing, is to still continue on and outlast. There's always hope to keep going, because you never know what is around the other side of the bend. I mean, I look at my life now versus 3, 5, 10, 15 years ago, and I have absolutely no idea if I would have ever guessed that this is what my life would look like. And that's going to be the same for everybody, especially, I know, you and I are in like late 20s, early 30s kind of era of our lives, and we're having a lot of these realizations. And a lot of folks who, go through these different stages of like, you know, self-awareness, right, in your life, it constantly changes. No matter how old I get, the older I get, the more I realize I don't know a damn thing, and I'm constantly figuring these things out, like, as I
Mhm.
go on the fly. And so personally, I oftentimes comfort myself with the idea of like, well, you didn't really realize you'd be here. So you never know what kind of things could be around the corner, good or bad. Whether it's something good or bad, at least it's going to be something that, I can experience and learn and grow from. And I just keep reminding myself that you don't need to be the best. You don't need to be the most talented or the smartest or the best singer or the funniest or the best auto shop worker, right? To have success. All you need to do is outlast the people who give up. And by showing up, you've already done better than, three-quarters of the people will ever do. And by staying and outlasting those negative thoughts and feelings that pull you back from doing what you really feel like it is the passion and the purpose of your life, when you give into that and let it go, then you rob yourself of the opportunity to find out if you really had it in you. And the trick is that you do, as long as you keep going. So it's kind of a catch 22. The longer you continue, the more you reach that without even realizing, because you're kind of in the midst of it. It's more about outlasting than it is about being the best. It's about getting better, not being, at the top, because you can't get to the top unless you work towards it.
Yes, and there is a certain element of lived experience and of self-awareness that is required to have that sort of mindset.
It's true.
When I was 17, I didn't have enough life experience to know that things could get better because I was 17. I was in a forced community of high school. I didn't get to choose the people I wanted to be around. I couldn't do anything for myself. I was, a kid. And I didn't know. Everyone kept telling me, well, things can get better, things will get better. And it's so easy to be like, bullshit, where's the proof?
Right.
When you literally have not had any life changes whatsoever. And it's an interesting mix of, yes, you need to take it upon yourself to try and enable these changes. No one's going to do it for you, but you also need to be motivated to do so with the actual hope and belief that things can get better. And that hope is what's hard to find. It's hard to see the light when you're buried underground,
Right.
but that doesn't mean the light's not there. You just
That's true.
It's gonna take a lot more work for you to see it than for somebody who's above ground, but that doesn't mean you can't get out of there. And the first couple of times that you have these huge changes, whether it's I'm out of high school and now I'm in college where people's views tend to line up more with mine, or I'm out of high school and now I'm in the real world and I'm getting to choose the people around me, or I've quit this finance job and now I'm working here. When you start seeing these huge shifts, you start seeing pieces of the world that you didn't know existed. And that's part of why I love traveling so much.
Right.
You see how big the world is and how little you actually know. And that can scare you. And quite frankly, it should.
Yeah.
But it can also empower you because you realize that these hard set thoughts of this is the way things are and it's never going to change aren't true,
Yeah.
because there's so much out there that we don't know. And the second you see and understand that, so much starts seeming more possible to you.
Yeah.
So much seems
You're so right.
possible.
You really have to see it for yourself, honestly. And, I guess, we could kind of part on that of, don't believe the thoughts that tell you there's nothing out there. See for yourself. You've got to see for
That's
yourself what's
perfect.
out there for you. And even if you can just delay and say, you know what, let me see for myself first, that they may give you more of a perspective than you ever realized, honestly. And so, I
That's
mean,
perfect.
I think there's a good place to kind of bring it to a close here. Is that, by saying never give up, I don't mean, stick with every single little thing, but what we mean is to think about what's important, prioritize. Pause. What we mean is to think about what's important, prioritize the things that you actually value, and to try to work towards them in a way that you fall in love with the process, not so much the goal. See what's out there for yourself, and before you come to that judgment of, well, there's nothing out there for me, open your eyes and see for yourself, because really you'd be surprised at how easy it is to outlast those who really don't care about what you really care about. And with that being said, I believe that's where we should bring our main topics to a close, Cass.
I agree.
One thing I wanted to mention before we go is that we do now have a Patreon. So visit fucktheplan.com or ftheplan.com or patreon.com/fucktheplan to check out the cool perks. We have an exclusive shirt that is nowhere else, that you could only get through subscribing. We also give access to early episodes, and we also have bonus episodes depending on the tier, one of which we will be recording very shortly. So I'm very excited about that. As always, I'm Aaron.
I'm Cass.
And this has been Fuck the Plan.